All right, we will get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Jadelyn Abbott, and I am a writing coach at the Graduate Student Success Center. Today, I'm going to be talking about planning and writing a grant proposal, the basics. If you've written a grant before, some of this might be a review, but I'm hoping you leave today with some materials or some resources to help you get started on your grant writing. Of course, this doesn't want to work for me right away. Okay, for today's goals, we're going to discuss what is a grant, what are the types of grants, what are some common elements of grant proposals. Then we're going to talk about making a plan for success, including how do I find a grant to apply for? Once I found a grant, how do I start planning? Okay, what do I do next? Then we'll talk about how do I write a convincing project narrative, which will be the bulk of your grant. And then I will leave you with some helpful grant writing resources. First, we're going to start with what is a grant. So a grant is a financial award to support a person, organization, project, or program. It is intended to achieve a specific goal or purpose. Typically, a grant is awarded to an organization from a foundation, corporation, or government agency. So pretty much it is money awarded to you that you don't have to pay back, which is amazing. There are various types of grants. So the main five are education and outreach grants, which are grants for funding education programs and projects. So if you're in the education sector, these are the types you usually apply for. There's project or program grants that look to solve a community need or problem. There's also general operating expense grants. These ones are unrestricted or core support grants for administration overhead. There's also capital project grants, which are to apply for construction, renovation, or large equipment purchases. And then there's more of the training capacity building. So if you need to provide professional development to your program or to teachers or another organization, you can apply for the training capacity building grant. So this is just kind of an overview of some of the grants. If you've never written a grant before, there's usually common elements of grant proposals, which can be called different things, but these are usually the basic components of a grant. The first is a short overview. So you'll write a short overview, which is usually an abstract or an executive summary, which is similar to any research project. But the purpose of the grant abstract is to provide a goal for your project, the need you're addressing, or the problem you're solving. You're supposed to also talk about what your expected outcomes are, how will you achieve them, how will you assess your success, and then why is this project important? Why should they be giving you money? And briefly, you can also talk about who you are as an organization or as a team. You'll also be asked to provide a section on examining your problem that you are trying to address. So you want to establish the context of your problem early on. So in this section, you'll talk about who or what will your project impact. This goes beyond, oh, I need this money because I want to answer my research question. They don't necessarily care about your research question. They care about who or what will this impact beyond just your organization and yourself. Then there will be a description of your project. This is the project narrative, which is usually a big chunk of the grant. Here you'll pretty much talk about, okay, here's my project, here's my goals, here's what my outcomes will be probably, and these are how I'm going to achieve these outcomes, including my methods, my assessment tool, and a timeline for this project. You'll also have to talk in depth about your budget. So what are you asking for? What kind of funds are you asking for? Why are you asking for particular amounts of money? This section, you usually use tables and figures to show how everything is connected and really where those funds are going to be used. You will also need in this section to justify why each cost, material, or equipment is essential for your study. Why do you need this equipment? Is it necessary to get the job done and to help this context or these people that you're helping or this context that you're working within? There's also other sections that may be required, such as cover letters, organizational qualifications, or other supporting documents. Sometimes you need to get letters from people to show that, oh, these are trustworthy people and they're leaders and they're hard workers. And so it really depends on the grant that you're applying for and what their expectations are. But generally, the first four on this chart are asked for, and they're sometimes called different things. So just look out for those different titles. So now that we kind of have an overview of what a grant is, the different types of grants and what's involved, or the different sections of a grant, we're going to start talking about making a plan for success. So how do I start looking for grants? Where do I go? How do I organize these materials? That's what we'll be talking about next. First, finding a grant can be quite overwhelming. There's so many grants out there. There's hundreds of thousands of grants out there that you can apply for. So identifying which grants you're going to apply for can take some time, but there's online grant databases available, which makes these processes a lot more quick and easy. I have a list here of some different grant databases that you can look into if you don't already have one that you're looking into, or if you've never looked for a grant before. Just Googling grants can take a lot of time, because usually they say, okay, in the beginning, when you don't have a grant already picked out, you should start with at least 100 that you're interested in, and then narrow that down to 20, and then narrow that down to, your top 2 to 3 that you want to apply for. And so Googling and coming up with 100 different grants would be very time consuming. So these online databases do that work for you. I'm actually going to click on this instrumental one and kind of just show you the website. So for this one, you have a 14-day trial for free. So if you need to look for a grant right now, you want to get out and start looking for a grant today, you can use the 14 days free to see, all of the things that it offers. If you're someone that's planning on writing grants a lot in your future, this might be something you want to invest in. But pretty much what you do within this management or this website is you will click on all of the things you want, what type of grant you're looking for, the type of salary or the type of funding you're looking for, all of the different things that you are looking for, and it will populate like hundreds and hundreds of grants for you. And then from there, you can identify, okay, which ones can I compete with, which ones are aligning with my goals, and then kind of do that narrowing down process, which we'll talk about here in a second. Even without a trial, you can kind of browse the different grants. So if you go up to browse, it says browse grants, or you can browse the different foundations. If you go to browse grants, you can see that you can browse by focus area. It doesn't have all of them here. So I'm in education, it doesn't necessarily have education here, but that might be something when I go into my 14 days trial, it's going to populate that for me and it will bring up the grants within education. You can also look by state or by location to identify, okay, I'm in Idaho, here are some grants available locally. So this is a great one to try. Like I said, there's others that you can try that are listed here, and there's more than even listed here. But this is just a place to get started, to start, identifying those 100 or 20 that you're interested in. Once you start going through this website and looking for different grants to apply for, it's helpful to there's a lot that goes into each of these grants. So if you're not sure, you haven't been told, okay, hey, you need to apply for this specific grant, and you're kind of just browsing, it's really beneficial to make something like this. This is called a funding matrix. And this is from learngrantwriting.org. And I'll send you these resources near the end of the presentation. But here you can make a matrix of all the ones that you're interested in. So what's the funding agency, the program, what projects are you eligible for, and then the funding available, the application deadline, all that stuff, and then the website on how to apply. Then once you have all the ones you're interested in, you can look across all of the grants to identify, okay, this one is due too soon, I don't have the time, or this one has the funds available that I need, so I'm going to do this one. And then you quickly have your website there to get right to it. And then you can identify which resources you need or which attachments that you'll need to upload and start producing. And so this is just an easy way to keep that organized because it can be really overwhelming to identify a grant that you want to apply for and spend all that time on. Another thing, this is pretty simple, but just make sure when you are starting to write grants that you are very organized with your files. They can get pretty messy and there's a lot of materials that goes into grant writing. And so make a very clear project or folder title for each of the grants you're applying for and make it really clear with your teammates and within your grant which ones go to or which files are for which resources and which things you're working on. So this is kind of just making sure that you're thinking this through before and that you're not scrambling to find resources later on. We know that when we save something and then we go to upload it or find it, it can just be really messy and frustrating. And so to make this really easy, start thinking about how to organize your files before you even get started. Okay, so now that you've chosen a grant to apply for, how do I prepare for success? So you've gone through Instrumental or another website and you've pinned down 1 or 2 grants that you want to apply for. So now what are you going to do? As the team, if you were the head of your team, or if you're doing this by yourself, you won't need to do a kickoff meeting, but if you do have a team with you, it's really important to host a kickoff meeting with your grant team. This makes sure that everyone's on the same level. You know what you're applying for. You kind of talk through each of the steps that you will need moving forward. For this, you need to make sure as the leader of this kickoff meeting that you prepare an agenda. You don't want to just go into your meeting and talk about, okay, here's the grant, who wants to do what? You want to have an idea already down for your team. So again, I am going to show an example of an agenda that I will share with you later. This is also from learngrantwriting.com, which is an amazing resource. So when you do a kickoff meeting with your team, you want to have this already, filled out. So as the leader, I would have everyone introduce themselves if they don't know each other already. Then you'll talk about the objective of this meeting, which is usually we're going to talk about our responsibilities for this grant writing. And then you'll talk about the project overview. So this is the grants that we're applying for. These are all of the things that we need to do. And then you can start kind of talking through and assigning people jobs based off of, their experiences, their strengths and weaknesses, who's going to do the budget, who's going to do the cost summary and all of those things. But sitting down with them, hopefully you can do this in person and bring, some donuts or something so everyone is excited to be there. You'll review the narrative skeleton. So what this means is like at the beginning of when I show the different sections, you'll review, okay, these are the things that this funder wants from us or the reviewer wants from us. And here's a skeleton. So you'll want to do this beforehand and we'll talk a little bit about that later. And then the really important part of this is to start thinking of a schedule. You need to set deadlines for each of the things that are due or each of the parts of the grant. So the budget, the narrative, you'll want all of that on your calendar. And so we'll talk a little bit about this as well next, but you want to make sure you know when your grant is due and give yourself plenty of time to start writing and revising and doing all of that important, tying up all the loose ends, which we'll talk about here right now. So when you're with your group in this kickoff meeting, you'll want to develop this grant schedule, but it's really important to start go backwards. So we're going to start with this due date of this grant, and then it's really beneficial to make your group's due date or your team's due date at least 2 days before the actual deadline. A lot of times it gets complicated to upload all of these attachments, and you don't want to be frantically going in and figuring out, oh my gosh, like I've missed this part or I didn't do this X, Y, and Z. And so you don't want to feel rushed like that. And deadlines are deadlines. It has to be there at a specific time. So try to make your deadline 2 days before the actual deadline to make sure you have everything prepared, and also have dedicated loose ends days embedded within your plans, because you're not probably going to finish everything on the exact day that you expected to. So make sure to add those in. Sorry. Okay. Once you've decided on this draft of a schedule, you're going to want to move your schedule into a project management software. There's various software. I'm going to show you Asana, but this helps you work with other team members to stay organized. You can set tasks and to-do lists as a group and then mark off when tasks are completed. Especially if you're working with a big team, it's hard to stay organized. And so having something like this is really beneficial. So I'm going to actually show you mine. And you can actually use this website. They have a free bundle, and then they have ones you can pay for, but you get a 30-day free with all of, all of what it provides you. You can get 30 days free. But you can even just use this for your homework or whatever you're doing. It's really nice. It's a really nice program. So here I have an example of our first project. I didn't add anyone, but I have my friends Dave and Miranda in here. They are my team. They are on my grant team. So once I get into this website, you can see where I pressed our first project. And then here you can invite people. So I didn't invite anyone because this is a hypothetical project, but I would invite all of my teammates and make them download this app. Once you've invited them all and they've all accepted the invitation, you can add to-do lists for each of your teammates. So here's me, here's Dave, he has something due Monday and also April 19th, and then Miranda has something due. And then you can add each of your teammates what you decided on during that kickoff meeting. You can add them, all of those things to this. Don't just necessarily assign it to them without talking about it first, but this would be your next step. What I also like about this is it shows you as a timeline. Okay, we know our due date is, say, the 14th, and here are all of our tasks spanned out across the weeks, and it's separated by each of the people. So if I added more people, they would be shown here, and all of the tasks would be there. You can also look at it as a calendar form with everyone's due dates on the calendar, and if you completed it, it will show that you completed it by a check mark. You can also have this dashboard, which is really helpful to show who's completed their tasks. Are there any things overdue? And then it also shows by person, who is completing their things, who maybe needs me to reach out to them and say, hey, do you need support? What's going on? And it shows you a bunch of different things for you throughout the process. You can also message people through this program within your team and then add attachments, which is nice to have everything in one space. Say you don't like Google Drive, this is another place where you can just add all of your files from your grant. Let's see here. When you go to your board, like I said, you can mark off when, say, Dave finished task 1, he just marks it off, and then it will go to the dashboard and it will show that he has completed that task. So that's something to look into if you are currently, working with a team or are thinking about working with a team. Like I said, there's free ones that you can use, which are also helpful. And even if you just need some accountability on your own writing projects, you can go in and add your tasks and mark them off when you complete them. Another thing is to do is when you're starting to write your grant and you're getting into the process, find someone to keep you accountable. This could be someone on your team, or if you're doing the grant alone, it's obviously going to have to be someone outside of your team, but make sure that you find someone to hold you accountable. It's found that 65% of people are more likely to follow through with a plan if they tell someone about it. So just having someone there to say, hey, I'm going to finish this by this date will be helpful. It's really easy to let things slide once you've let the first thing go. It's like, oh, I'm already behind, might as well watch Netflix for another full day. And so it's really easy to let that happen. So make sure you have someone holding you accountable. Like I said, this can be someone within your team, which can be helpful because you can say you're holding each other accountable, and then you can give each other feedback on your sections of the grant. Another thing to keep in mind when you're starting is to just finish your first draft quickly and then get feedback. So when you're doing a bigger grant, it should take no longer than 8 days to produce your first 10 to 8 pages of your draft. If you're doing a more straightforward, shorter grant, then 4 days, but just spend, a week or so just getting everything down, no matter how messy it is, just get it out there and see if you have a compelling argument, and then go back and make those revisions. One thing to keep in mind as a tip is to write your narrative backwards. And what I mean by this is to start with the hardest. So within your grant, within the narrative section, they'll give you a ton of questions. Start with the toughest questions for you first. So if you are like, I don't really know how I meet that question, that's where you should start. And then you really digging deep into why is this important? And then that will help you write all of the other sections that come a little bit more easy, because you fully thought and developed this process in your project in a deeper way. So that is one tip of, okay, getting the hard part done first, and then it will be easier from there. And like I said, get feedback right away, no matter how messy it is. You don't want to spend all this time and then the person reviewing it or looking at it saying, this is not compelling at all, you need to restart. So just get it out there, get it started, and get feedback quickly. Another thing that is important is to have a dedicated space for writing. This isn't only for grant writing, but grant writing is a lot of writing quickly usually. And it's, high stakes because you're wanting to get a big sum of money. And so when you go into this space, it is time to turn everything off and only focus on your grant or on your piece of writing. So no matter what, if you're not writing a grant, try to find a space that you feel like you can go into and just relax and get started and not have any distractions. And then overall, if you do not have time to do a grant correctly, then just don't do it. Say you look and you really want a grant, but it's due in a week or two or shorter than that. Chances are you're not going to get it if you're rushing and you're not doing things correctly. So don't waste your time if you don't have the time. Okay, that was a lot of information, but now we're going to talk about how to start thinking about writing these narratives and write them in a convincing manner. Okay, another set of steps. So when you're thinking about writing a convincing narrative, this is usually the part, again, that is, what is your project about, why it is important, and the skeleton of your grant. It's really important for you to know why you believe in your project. Even if someone hands this to you and says, hey, you need to go write this, you need to identify why it is important and you believe in it to be able to write in a way that the reviewer believes you. So you have to genuinely believe in it. You have to write down why you believe this is important, not only to your organization or to yourself. Oh, it's important because I have to do it. But beyond that, why is it important beyond my organization or beyond my school or wherever you're working? And then think about, do you get more energized or drained when you're working on or thinking about it? If this is something that you have a choice on, try to think of something that is going to keep you energized, because it's a lot of work to do a grant and you don't want to already feel drained when you haven't even started. Okay, second is to be clear about what problem you are solving. Okay, so does your project solve real world problems, or are you just answering a research question? A lot of research questions do answer real world problems, but we need to go past just an idea and a research question and identify, does this solve a big problem? Because ideas in itself do not deserve funding, but solutions to problems do. So you really want to be clear about what your problem is and think outside of your research question. Then you need to identify your why argument. So when you can think about why beyond, oh, someone told me to, think about, why does this project matter to your community and how are you making your community stronger? Again, think outside of your organization or outside of yourself and think about the community. Think about what other things can happen from developing this project. So if this happens and I get the money for this project, these other things might flourish. So start thinking about outside of your project, what other things might start getting better or might be beneficial outside of your own funding. Think about what happens if this project is not funded. is it the end of the world if this project is not funded? Can you possibly do something else to solve this problem? Or is there a bigger problem within your problem that deserves funding and that can solve this, this bigger problem? So think about, okay, if I don't do this, it's really not going to be that big of a deal, or is it? And then think about what are your regional implications? And then again, does this go beyond my boundaries of my school or organization? And going back to what happens if the project is not funded, obviously you don't need to change the world with your project, but think about, does it really have large implication or large outcomes that will happen? Because if you're asking for a lot of money, they want to know these changes will actually make a difference. Another thing to think about when you're writing your narrative is how to leverage your grant. So funders want their money to go as far as possible. So if you're, within this organization and you already have funding elsewhere, this might not be applicable to everybody, but if you have funding elsewhere and maybe that funding's running out, you can make sure to say, hey, I need this grant now because I'm having this funding for this other project and they are related. And if I have them together, then these amazing things can happen. So really try to demonstrate the relationship between your funding sources and how this grant will leverage another funding source or another project that you're working on. And another really important step is to prove your team is the best. People want to invest in people that they trust and feel like that they're leaders. So you need to demonstrate that you have a capable team with relevant experience. And this starts with you thinking about what makes my team exceptional leaders and where are my weaknesses within my team. Because we know that strong teams win projects. And again, looking beyond, what your team has, it's okay to identify your weaknesses and ask for support within other organizations. And what I mean by this is say you identify everyone on your team has this weakness, but this weakness is really important for this grant. You can look for other people outside of your organization or your school or your team and join them onto your team to make your grant stronger. This may mean that you need to split your funds, but having some money is better than having no money. And if it's a big weakness, then you're going to need to fill that gap with someone from another organization or outside of your field. Also, when you're writing your narratives, be convincing with your game plan. We want to have a great game plan that's very realistic. A lot of people write and it's very like, oh, all of these amazing things are going to happen super quickly and perfectly, but that's not realistic. So you're going to have to talk about what is your game plan overall and what is your realistic plan. Avoid language that makes it seem like you're just going to figure it out when you have the funding. Funders want to know that you have a plan that can be started up immediately. Here's the money, now go start tomorrow. They want to know that that's what's going to happen, not that they're going to fund the project and it's going to sit for a year until you figure things out. So make sure you have a plan. And this plan, even though it's not going to go how you say it's going to go, at least you've thought it through and have an overall plan that is going to change throughout. But they want to see that you've thought it from beginning to end and have some sort of game plan rather than, oh, we'll see how it goes. And then it's not going to get completed and the money's going to go to waste. This is another really important point because you need to make sure you answer each narrative question directly and clearly. So within a grant application, you're going to have a ton of narrative questions. They're going to ask you, they're going to be like a group of a bunch of questions. One mistake people make is that they pick the ones out that they want to answer that align with their project and that they can easily answer right away. You want to make sure you don't make this mistake and that you answer each question directly and clearly, and so they know exactly which question that you're answering. So one way to do this is to actually look at the list of questions. They're usually just in a paragraph and take them out and separate them. Once you've separated the questions, you can create a starting sentence or heading for each of the questions and bold it and italicize it. And you can keep that there within your grant so that the reader effortlessly can look and, okay, they're answering question 1 right here, or they're answering question 2 here. And so what that looks like is, say they ask a question, you take out the 2 main points and make that into a header of that section, and then you write that section that based off that question. So each question is clearly pretty much labeled, it's bolded, it's italicized, and then when the reviewer goes in, they can say, okay, here are my list of questions, and they can easily find the answers to the questions. They do not want to do the work of digging through your grant to identify if you've even answered the questions and like, oh, they've kind of answered this one, but it might also be them answering this question. That's really frustrating for a reviewer, so just make sure to make it effortless. So when you're writing your narrative, you want to make sure that you're doing some things or you're avoiding the deficit-based approach. So we're going to look at what is strong versus what is wrong. What is wrong is a deficit-based approach. It's not wrong complete, like you can't avoid deficit-based approach because that's pretty much saying there's something wrong, which we want to portray to our reader, but this should only be about 20% of your narrative. So when you are writing your narrative, it's okay to say, oh, look at these statistics, there's this big issue. But if you're only focusing on this issue of these people or of this context, then you're only really focusing on the negative of the negative. And we're showing that we define these people and these places by their worst characteristics, which reiterates the stereotypes that organizations are fighting against. So yes, state the problem, but make this deficit-based wording only about 20%, and then use strength-based approach for the other 80% of the narrative. And I'll talk about on the next slide the differences between the two. But here's a quote that I would like to point out. Painting a vivid picture of the problem to be solved is important, but I have since learned about the importance of balancing a narrative with positive language as well. So again, yes, it's okay to provide this realistic, vivid picture of there is an issue, but let's not make it seem like that is what defines these group of people or this context. Here's a table showing the difference between this deficit-based and strength-based approach. So a deficit-based writing would be you're only focusing on your program is going to come in and it's going to be the answer, rather than the strength-based approach of seeing the people as the answer and your program helping these people to solve this problem. The deficit-based is also us versus them, rather than strengths-based, where it's we are in this together, we are going to figure out a plan together, rather than, oh, we're going to do these things and we're going to help them solve this problem. It's no, together, using our resources, we can help them as a team, and together we can solve this problem. And then deficit-based is focusing your language on what is broken rather than focusing on what is working. So making sure your whole narrative isn't just a drag, like negative, 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 focusing on the problem or stating the problem and then talking about how we're going to answer this problem or how we're going to address this problem together, and how we're going to leverage what's already working to solve the problem. So if you're currently working on your narrative, or you're planning to start grant writing tomorrow, here are some things to do right now for your grant narrative. First, write down just a few sentences communicating why this project personally matters to you. If you can't think of anything, then this may not be something that you want to pursue, unless, of course, like I've said, it's part of you or you have to do it. Try to figure out why this personally matters to you. And if you can't find that, then maybe think of a different project if you have a choice. Then type up a 1-paragraph project description that includes the problem you're addressing. And then once you've done that, ask others if it's compelling. So if I type this project description up and give it to my mom and she looks at it and it's just like this, isn't interesting or doesn't really highlight the problem or doesn't seem very urgent, then you're going to want to go back and think that through a little bit more. Then you can add bullet points communicating why this project matters to your beneficiaries and to the community. Again, what is this? Who is this going to benefit and how? And then identify the strengths and weaknesses of your team. Do you need additional partners? It's really important to think about what each of your teammates bring to the table and where those gaps are. So you can identify, okay, I need to ask so-and-so from this department to be in charge of our budget, or something that we have no idea what we're doing. So that's important to identify before or while you're thinking about your narrative. Okay, I'm going to leave you off with some resources to get you started. So a lot of, there's a ton of great resources out there. One book that a lot of this information today is coming from is How to Write a Grant, Become a Writing Unicorn or Grant Writing Unicorn. Meredith Noble has a ton of resources. She's also part of the learngrantwriting.org website. And this book gives you a lot of step-by-step ways to create a budget and all of those things, which grant writing is a beast, so we couldn't cover all of that within the session. But this book really pinpoints each of those things. There's also grant writing classes on that instrumental website that I was showing you. You can go in and take these classes or watch videos. So there's one on 7 tips to write grants like a pro, and tons of different videos to help you. And then here, I'm gonna click on this. I'm actually gonna put this in the chat in a second. There's a ton of free resources from the learngrantwriting.org. There's a grant writing budget template. So like I said, I'll send this to you here in a second. Even though we didn't talk about budgets, if you're at the place in your grant writing that you need help with organizing your budget, this is a great resource. So you would just make a copy of this in your Google Doc or your Google Sheets. And down here at the bottom, it has you to look at your budget from the personal level. What are some personal funds you're gonna need? Cost share, I can't see because my thing's in the way. Travel funds, equipment, and you break it all down, and then it will come into your summary. It will all calculate and go into your summary. So this is really beneficial if you're trying to figure out your budget. There's also the grant funding research matrix on this webpage, which I already showed you. If you're trying to figure out what grant to apply for, you can go there. There's a sample kickoff meeting agenda, which I also showed you. Here, you can just copy it and start typing in it. It's already laid out for you. And then some grants, you're gonna need letters of support. And if you do, this Google Sheet helps you organize who have I asked for a letter of support? Have they received it? Have I received it? What's their email, phone, etc. So these letters of support are usually you reaching out to people to defend that you deserve this grant. So let me send this in. Oops. All right, I'll send that in the chat here in a second. But are there any questions about what we've covered today? Send that in the chat. Oops. I know grant writing can be a lot, so that was a lot to digest, but hopefully if you've never written a grant before, that was a good place to get started with looking at instrumental or other data managers and the Asana, which will be great for, if you're in charge of a team. And then these other free grant resources can help you start organizing your budget and all of that. If you already have been writing grants, sorry if that was not new to you, but hopefully we can do another workshop that furthers what's after that. No questions.
I have a question.
Okay.
So when you were talking about know your why argument, and you said what happens if this project is not funded, so should that be communicated within your grant? Like should you have a section for if my project is not funded, I'm going to do this and do this, or like other options?
Yeah, I don't think you would necessarily have a section for that, but you need to think about, okay, what are the is this project, what's going to happen if this isn't funded? Say if it's an education realm, elementary teaching, if I don't get this funded, students are not going to have the resources they need to become readers. Like that's a big deal. And so you are trying to just make your case that if this research is not funded, something's going to be bad or someone's going to be negatively impacted. And so you don't necessarily say, oh, if it's not funded, these students aren't going to be able to read, but you want to be able to portray like without this funding, students might not have the appropriate resources and they're going to fall even further below the proficiency or like the level that they currently are. And students are already struggling with reading. And so we really need these resources and start thinking of it that way. Like what is going to happen if you don't have this funding? What are the implications? What are the negative impacts? And then portray that in your narrative. You don't, like I said, you don't necessarily have to write that word for word. Like, hey, if you don't give me funding, this bad thing is going to happen. But just start thinking about that as intertwining it into your narrative. That this is a real big issue. That if it goes unsolved, big things may happen, or students aren't going to be supported and meet their full potential.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? No. All right, well, thank you everyone. If there's no more questions, we will end it here. You can always shoot me an email if something comes up, or set a meeting with me or any of the coaches to talk about your grant and where you currently are if you need help moving forward. And thank you so much for being here.